The arena was already shaking before Bruce Lee entered the building. Thousands of people filled the massive Japanese hall, their voices rising beneath the steel roof like thunder trapped inside a cage. Camera flashes exploded from every direction. Officials hurried across the floor. Wrestlers, martial artists, journalists, and dignitaries filled the seats surrounding the competition area. And in the center of it all stood a man who looked almost impossible to move. He was enormous. His body seemed carved from stone, his shoulders wide enough to block the light behind him. He had just won the final match of the afternoon, and now he stood proudly beside the judges' table, receiving a large silver trophy. The crowd roared. He raised the trophy above his head. Then his eyes drifted toward the judges and stopped. Bruce Lee was sitting quietly at the table. Compared with the massive champion, Bruce looked almost fragile. He was dressed simply, his posture relaxed, his eyes calm. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't tried to impress anyone. While everyone else had been reacting to the enormous athlete's victory, Bruce had simply watched. The champion stared at him for several seconds. Then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a powerful man gives when he believes he has finally found someone who doesn't understand his strength. Bruce noticed, but he said nothing. The champion walked toward the judges' table. The noise inside the arena slowly faded. One conversation after another stopped. People began turning their heads. The champion stopped directly in front of Bruce. "You," he said. Bruce looked up. "Yes?" The champion pointed toward the competition floor. "You've been watching me all afternoon." Bruce nodded. "I've been watching everyone." A few people laughed nervously. The champion didn't. "You are a judge?" Bruce glanced at the officials beside him. "Today." The champion leaned closer. "Then tell me something." Bruce waited. "What did you see?" The question sounded simple, but there was a challenge hidden inside it. Bruce looked toward the arena. "I saw a very strong man." The champion smiled. "Only strong?" Bruce's expression didn't change. "And very confident." The smile disappeared. The champion's jaw tightened. Around them, people began whispering. Everyone could feel something changing. The champion had expected Bruce to praise him. Instead, Bruce had given him an answer that sounded almost too calm. The champion lowered his voice. "You don't think I'm strong enough?" Bruce shook his head. "No, I think you're stronger than most men I've ever seen." That answer should have ended the conversation. It didn't. The champion pointed at Bruce. "Then why do you look at me like you already know how I would fight?" The arena went silent. Bruce looked directly into his eyes. "I don't know how you would fight." He paused. "I only know that every man has habits." The champion laughed, a deep, booming laugh that echoed across the hall. "You think you can read me?" Bruce leaned back slightly. "No." The champion grinned. "I think you are afraid to try." The audience reacted immediately. Some people gasped, others laughed. The officials exchanged nervous glances. Bruce remained completely still. But something had changed in his eyes. Not anger. Interest. For years, Bruce had studied movement obsessively. He wasn't fascinated by size alone. He studied timing, distance, rhythm, balance, breathing, intention. And now, standing before him, was a man whose greatest weapon wasn't simply his enormous body. It was confidence. Bruce could see it. And confidence could become predictable. The champion turned toward the audience. "Maybe our little judge should show us what he knows." The crowd erupted. Bruce didn't move. The champion turned back. "What happened?" he asked. "You were so confident a moment ago." Bruce smiled faintly. "I didn't say I was confident. Then what are you? Bruce looked at him. Curious. The champion frowned. That single word somehow irritated him more than an insult would have, because Bruce wasn't treating him like an unbeatable giant. He was treating him like a problem worth solving, and that was something the champion wasn't used to. A question for everyone watching. Before we go any further, imagine you were sitting in that arena. A man twice Bruce Lee's size is standing in front of him, challenging him in front of thousands of people. What would you do? Would you walk away? Would you accept the challenge? Or would you try to prove that technique can defeat size? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this story, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Are you listening from the United States, Canada, the UK, India, Japan, Australia, or somewhere else? Write your city or country in the comments, because what happened next would make everyone inside that arena question what they thought they knew about strength. The champion stepped back. Come on. Bruce looked toward the officials. One of them quietly whispered, Mr. Lee, you don't have to do this. Bruce nodded. I know. He stood. The crowd erupted again. Bruce walked toward the floor. The difference between the two men became even more obvious. The champion towered over him. His body was massive. Bruce's frame was lean and compact. Some people in the crowd laughed. Others began shouting encouragement toward the champion. A few journalists raised their cameras. Bruce ignored all of them. He simply looked at the champion's feet. The champion noticed. You're looking at my feet? Bruce nodded. Yes? Why? Because that's where your balance begins. The champion's smile faded. For the first time, he stopped laughing. Bruce took a few steps backward. The champion raised his hands. Ready? Bruce nodded. The crowd became silent. The champion moved first. It happened incredibly fast for a man of his size. He surged forward. The floor seemed to shake beneath him. Bruce didn't retreat. He waited. At the final moment, Bruce shifted sideways. The champion's hand passed through empty air. Bruce was suddenly beside him. The champion stopped. The crowd gasped. Bruce hadn't attacked. He hadn't pushed. He hadn't tried to overpower him. He had simply moved. The champion turned. What was that? Bruce answered calmly. Your first mistake. The champion's face hardened. My mistake? You showed me exactly where you were going. The crowd became restless. The champion charged again, this time faster. Bruce moved again. One step, a slight turn, a change in angle. The champion passed him. Again. No punch, no dramatic strike, nothing that looked powerful. But the crowd was beginning to understand. Bruce wasn't fighting the man's body. He was fighting his movement. The champion stopped breathing heavily. He stared at Bruce. Bruce looked almost untouched. Then the champion lowered his stance. The playful expression was gone. Now he was serious. Very serious. You think you're clever? Bruce shook his head. No. Then stop running. Bruce looked at him. I haven't been running. The champion suddenly exploded forward. This time, Bruce stepped directly toward him. The crowd screamed. For one terrifying second, it looked as though the two men were about to collide head-on. Then Bruce pivoted. His hand touched the champion's arm. His other hand guided the man's shoulder. It was barely a movement, but the champion's enormous body suddenly shifted off its line. His foot slid. His balance disappeared for a fraction of a second. Bruce stepped away. The champion caught himself. The arena fell completely silent. The man looked down at his feet, then at Bruce, then back at his feet. He understood what had happened. Bruce hadn't defeated his strength. He had redirected it. And suddenly, the champion realized something uncomfortable. The bigger he moved, the more powerful the mistake became. He slowly raised his eyes. Bruce was waiting, not smiling, not mocking him, just waiting. The champion's pride wouldn't allow him to stop. He took another breath. Again. Bruce nodded. Again. This time, however, the champion wasn't fighting the same man he had approached 5 minutes earlier. He was fighting an idea. And the idea was terrifying. What if strength itself could become a weakness? The champion moved. Bruce watched. 1 heartbeat, 2. Then, Bruce disappeared from the line of attack. The champion stumbled forward. A collective gasp rolled through the arena. And somewhere among the thousands of spectators, one journalist lowered his camera. He wasn't interested in photographing the champion anymore. He was watching Bruce Lee. Because for the first time that afternoon, the question wasn't whether the smaller man could survive. The question was, how far ahead had Bruce already calculated? And Bruce hadn't even shown them everything he knew. The champion stood motionless in the center of the floor. His chest rose and fell. Bruce remained several feet away. The two men stared at each other. The crowd waited. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered. Even the cameras seemed quieter. Then the champion spoke. "Who taught you to move like that?" Bruce answered, "Failure." The champion blinked. Bruce continued, "Every time I made a mistake, I had to understand why." The champion looked at his own hands. For the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not anger, not humiliation, respect. But his pride was still fighting inside him. He had one final question. "If you knew I couldn't catch you, why did you accept my challenge?" Bruce smiled. "Because you challenged me." "And?" Bruce looked around the arena. "Because sometimes people don't believe an answer until they see it." The champion lowered his head slightly. The crowd waited. Then he did something nobody expected. He stepped forward and bowed. Bruce returned the bow. The arena exploded. But the story wasn't over, because the champion lifted his head and said, "Tomorrow, teach me." Bruce raised an eyebrow. "Teach you what?" The champion smiled for the first time without arrogance. "How to stop fighting my opponent." He paused. "And start fighting my own mistakes." Bruce looked at him for several seconds. Then he nodded. "Now you're ready to learn." The crowd erupted once more. And that evening, thousands of people came expecting to witness a battle between a giant and a smaller martial artist. Instead, they witnessed something far more powerful. They saw a man discover that size could create confidence, but understanding could create control. And Bruce Lee had just shown an entire arena that sometimes the most dangerous fighter isn't the one who hits the hardest. It's the one who understands when not to hit at all. The arena had finally gone quiet. The thousands of voices that had filled the building only minutes earlier had disappeared into a strange, almost respectful silence. The massive sumo champion was still standing in the center of the floor, but he no longer looked like the unstoppable giant everyone had watched earlier. He looked like a man who had just discovered that the world was much larger than he had believed. Across from him stood Bruce Lee, calm, still, almost impossibly relaxed. The champion slowly looked down at his feet. Then he looked at Bruce. "How did you do that?" Bruce didn't answer immediately. The champion took a step closer. "I've fought men bigger than you. I've fought men faster than you. I've fought men who were stronger than you." Bruce nodded. "I believe you. But nobody has ever made me feel like I was fighting myself." Bruce's expression softened. "That's because you were." The champion frowned. Bruce pointed toward the floor. You didn't lose because you were too slow. He pointed toward the man's chest. You didn't lose because you were weak. Then he pointed toward the man's feet. You lost because your body committed before your mind did. The champion stared at him. He didn't understand. Bruce continued. When you attack, your body tells the story before your hands do. Your shoulders move. Your weight shifts. Your breathing changes. Your eyes focus. Your feet prepare. The champion remained silent. Bruce smiled. If someone watches carefully enough, you announce your attack before you make it. That sentence hit harder than any punch. The champion had spent years being told that his greatest weapon was his size. Now, this smaller man was telling him that his body had been giving away his intentions. The champion looked toward the officials. Give us 5 minutes. One official looked uncertain. 5 minutes for what? The champion answered without taking his eyes off Bruce. To learn. The following morning, the arena was almost empty. No screaming crowd, no reporters, no cameras, only the sound of footsteps across the wooden floor. Bruce Lee entered quietly. He expected to see the champion practicing alone. Instead, the giant man was already waiting. He had removed his ceremonial clothing. He stood in simple training attire, breathing slowly. For the first time, he looked less like a celebrity and more like a student. Bruce stopped several feet away. You came early. The champion nodded. I didn't sleep much. Bruce smiled. Why? Because I kept thinking about yesterday. Bruce said nothing. The champion continued. I've always believed that the stronger man wins. Bruce looked at him. And now? The champion took a deep breath. Now I think the man who understands the moment wins. Bruce nodded. Better. The champion smiled. Is that your way of saying I'm learning? No. Bruce turned away. It's my way of saying you finally asked the right question. The champion laughed. For the first time, the tension between them disappeared. Bruce walked toward the center of the floor. Today, we're not going to fight. The champion looked surprised. Then what are we doing? Walking. Walking? Yes. Bruce demonstrated. 1 step forward, 1 step backward. Then a slight shift to the side. Your body should never be separate from your balance. The champion copied him. His enormous frame moved awkwardly. Bruce shook his head. Too much. The champion tried again. Still too much. Again. Too much. The champion frowned. I weigh more than twice what you do. My body moves differently. Bruce nodded. Exactly. He walked around him. That's why you can't copy my movement. The champion looked confused. Then why are you teaching me? Bruce smiled. I'm not teaching you how to move like me. He paused. I'm teaching you how to move like yourself. The champion stared at him. That sentence changed everything. For the next hour, Bruce made him repeat the same movement. No punches, no throws, no dramatic techniques, just balance. The champion became frustrated. I already know how to stand. Bruce shook his head. No, you know how to stand when you're comfortable. The champion narrowed his eyes. Bruce stepped closer. What happens when you're tired? The champion didn't answer. What happens when you're angry? Silence. What happens when someone surprises you? The champion looked down. Bruce nodded. That's where your real weakness lives. The champion took a breath. Then surprise me. Bruce smiled. Good. The champion didn't know what was coming. Bruce stood several feet away. Close your eyes. The champion looked suspicious. Why? Because you've been depending on your eyes. The champion closed them. Now, Listen. The room was silent. He could hear distant footsteps, a door closing, the hum of lights, his own breathing. Then, a light tap touched his shoulder. The champion spun. Too late. Bruce was already behind him. The champion opened his eyes. Bruce was smiling. You heard me? I didn't know where you were. Exactly. Bruce walked away. You're used to controlling the space with your size. Take your size away, and suddenly you don't know where the danger is. The champion shook his head. Do it again. Bruce did. Again and again. Every time, the champion reacted too late. But gradually, something changed. His breathing slowed, his shoulders relaxed, his feet stopped moving wildly. He began listening instead of reacting. Bruce noticed. Better. The champion smiled. Again. Your turn to decide. If you were training with Bruce Lee and he told you to close your eyes and rely only on sound, what would you do? A. Trust the training and keep going. B. Refuse, because it's too dangerous. C. Try to figure out the trick first. Write A, B, or C in the comments. And if you're enjoying this story, hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Write your city and country below, because the next lesson would push the champion much closer to his breaking point. 3 hours later, the champion was exhausted. Sweat covered his face. His breathing had become heavy. His legs felt like they were made of stone. But Bruce kept watching. Again. The champion looked at him. Again? Yes. I've done it dozens of times. Then, you should be better. The champion clenched his fists. For the first time, frustration began returning. You're enjoying this? Bruce shook his head. No. Then why keep pushing? Because you're still thinking about winning. The champion stared at him. Bruce continued. You're trying to prove you can catch me. So, that means you're still fighting me. The champion didn't understand. Bruce pointed toward his chest. Stop fighting me. Then he pointed toward the floor. Fight your impatience. The champion's face changed. Bruce continued. Fight your pride. Another pause. Fight the part of you that needs everyone to know you're powerful. The champion looked away. The words hurt. But they were true. He had spent his entire career building an identity around being unbeatable. Crowds cheered when he entered. People stepped aside when he walked through a room. Opponents were intimidated before the first movement. He had become so accustomed to being feared that he had forgotten how to be challenged. And Bruce had challenged him without ever trying to humiliate him. That was what made it difficult. The champion lowered his head. You know what scares me? Bruce waited. The champion whispered, Maybe I'm not as strong as everyone thinks. Bruce looked at him. Then he said something the champion would remember for the rest of his life. Good. The champion looked up. Good? Yes. Bruce stepped closer. Because the moment you're no longer afraid of discovering your weakness loses its power. The champion's eyes became wet. He quickly looked away. He didn't want Bruce to see. But Bruce saw, and he didn't mention it. He simply said, Take a break. The champion sat down. For several minutes, neither man spoke. That evening, they walked outside the training hall. The city was glowing beneath the night sky. Cars moved through the streets. People walked past them without realizing what had happened inside. The champion stopped. Bruce. Bruce turned. Yesterday, I wanted to embarrass you. I know. I thought you were just another man sitting at a table. Bruce smiled. I was. The champion laughed softly. No. He shook his head. You were watching everything. Bruce looked toward the street. That's what people forget. What? Being quiet doesn't mean you're not paying attention. The champion nodded. Then he asked, "Why don't you ever seem angry?" Bruce thought for a moment. "I get angry." "Really?" "Of course." "Then why don't you show it?" Bruce looked at him. "Because anger is useful only when you control it." The champion smiled. "So everything is about control?" Bruce shook his head. "No." "Then what?" "Freedom." The champion frowned. Bruce continued. "If you're controlled by anger, you're not free. If you're controlled by fear, you're not free. If you're controlled by pride, you're not free." He looked directly at the champion. "And if you're controlled by the need to prove you're stronger than everyone else?" Bruce paused. "You're not free either." The champion said nothing. Those words followed him long after they returned inside. The next morning, something unexpected happened. The champion arrived before Bruce, but this time he wasn't alone. 3 younger wrestlers stood beside him. They looked nervous. The champion pointed toward Bruce when he entered. "That's him." One of the young men whispered, "The little martial artist?" The champion immediately turned. "Don't call him that." The young wrestler looked embarrassed. The champion looked back at Bruce. "Yesterday, I thought strength was making people afraid of you." Bruce smiled. "And today?" The champion looked at the young wrestlers. "Today I think strength is having nothing to prove." Bruce nodded. Then he looked at the 3 young men. "Good." The champion stepped forward. "I want them to learn too." Bruce crossed his arms. "Then they need to understand something." The young wrestlers waited. Bruce said, "I'm not going to teach you how to defeat someone." They looked confused. Bruce continued, "I'm going to teach you how not to be defeated by yourselves." The champion smiled, but before anyone could respond, a loud voice came from the doorway. "Then maybe you should prove it." Everyone turned. A group of officials stood there, and behind them was another famous fighter, a man who had watched the previous confrontation. He had come to challenge Bruce, but unlike the sumo champion, he wasn't interested in learning. He wanted revenge. His eyes were fixed on Bruce, and the smile on his face told everyone in the room one thing. The real danger had just arrived. Bruce looked at him, then at the champion. The champion whispered, "Who is he?" Bruce didn't answer. He simply stepped forward. The stranger smiled. "I've heard enough stories about you." Bruce remained calm. "Stories are usually exaggerated." The stranger laughed. "Then let's find out." The room fell silent, and for the first time since the sumo champion had challenged him, Bruce Lee's expression became completely serious. Because this man wasn't looking for a lesson. He was looking for a fight. And Bruce knew something the others didn't. The greatest danger wasn't the man's strength. It was the fact that he had already decided what he wanted to prove. And a man who fights only to prove something can become very unpredictable. Bruce slowly raised his hands. The champion stepped backward. The young wrestlers watched in silence. And somewhere outside the training hall, the first sounds of the growing crowd could already be heard. By sunset, everyone in the building would be talking about Bruce Lee. But this time, it wouldn't be because he had defeated a giant. It would be because someone had finally found a way to make Bruce Lee take the challenge personally. And nobody knew what would happen when that moment came. The training hall had never felt so quiet. Bruce Lee stood in the center of the wooden floor, his hands relaxed at his sides. Across from him stood the stranger. He was younger than the sumo champion, but there was nothing gentle about his expression. His shoulders were broad, his fists tightly wrapped, and his eyes carried the kind of confidence that came from years of winning. The sumo champion stood near the wall with the three younger wrestlers. He had seen Bruce remain calm under pressure before, but this was different. The stranger wasn't challenging Bruce because he was curious. He wasn't looking for a lesson. He wanted to defeat him. The stranger stepped forward. "I've watched what happened yesterday." Bruce said nothing. "You embarrassed a champion." The sumo wrestler immediately stepped forward. "He embarrassed himself." The stranger glanced at him. "You're defending him now?" The giant smiled. "No." He looked toward Bruce. "I'm respecting him." The stranger laughed. "That is exactly what I don't understand." He turned back to Bruce. "You're smaller than everyone in this room, yet everyone suddenly acts as if you're some kind of master." Bruce finally answered, "I don't need anyone to act like anything." The stranger's smile disappeared. "Then prove it." Bruce looked at him carefully. "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Why what? Why do you need me to prove something to you?" The stranger didn't answer. Bruce continued, "You already decided what you believe." The stranger clenched his fists. "You're avoiding the challenge." Bruce shook his head. "No, I'm trying to understand the challenge." The stranger suddenly stepped forward. "Then understand this." He pointed toward the center of the floor. "I won't stop until you admit I'm better." Bruce stared at him. Then he quietly walked toward the center. "Fine." The room erupted with nervous whispers. The sumo champion looked concerned. He had learned something during his time with Bruce. When Bruce became quieter, he became more dangerous. The stranger raised his guard. Bruce lowered his stance. Neither man moved. 5 seconds. 10. 20. The silence became unbearable. The stranger's eyes shifted. Bruce noticed. His left shoulder moved slightly. Bruce didn't react. The stranger moved again. A tiny adjustment of his foot. Bruce noticed that too. Then the attack came. Fast. A straight strike toward Bruce's chest. Bruce moved just enough to avoid it. The stranger immediately followed with another attack. Bruce blocked. Another. Bruce slipped away. The stranger increased the speed. Bruce kept moving. No wasted motion. No unnecessary aggression. The stranger's frustration began to show. He attacked again. Bruce redirected his arm. The stranger stumbled half a step. The audience gasped, but Bruce didn't counterattack. He simply reset. The stranger stared at him. "Why aren't you hitting me?" Bruce answered. "Because you're already defeating yourself." The stranger's face turned red. He charged. This time, Bruce stepped toward him. Their bodies almost collided. Bruce's hand touched the man's shoulder. His other hand caught the attacker's wrist. Then Bruce turned. The stranger's momentum carried him forward. His feet crossed. His balance disappeared. He fell hard onto the wooden floor. Silence. Nobody moved. The stranger lay there, breathing heavily. Bruce stepped back. He offered his hand. The stranger looked at it. For several seconds, he refused. Then he grabbed it. Bruce pulled him up. The stranger stared into Bruce's eyes. "You could have hit me." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Bruce answered simply, "Because winning isn't always about hurting someone." The stranger looked down, and something inside him finally broke. Not his body, his pride. A question before the final moment. Think about what Bruce just did. He had an opportunity to humiliate the man in front of everyone. Instead, he helped him stand. What would you have done? Would you have taken the victory and celebrated? Would you have walked away? Or would you have helped your opponent stand? Write your answer in the comments. And if this story has kept you listening, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Write your city and country below. I want to see how many different places are listening to this story. Because the final lesson Bruce was about to give the sumo champion wasn't about fighting at all. It was about what happens after the fight ends. The stranger sat against the wall. The sumo champion walked over. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the stranger laughed quietly. "I understand now." The champion looked at him. "What?" The stranger pointed toward Bruce. "He wasn't trying to beat me." The champion smiled. "No. He was waiting for me to beat myself." The champion nodded. "Now you understand." The stranger looked at the enormous sumo champion. "You learned this from him?" The champion smiled. "I learned it from losing to him." Bruce overheard them. He turned. "You didn't lose." The champion raised an eyebrow. Bruce continued. "You learned." The champion smiled. "And isn't that the same thing?" Bruce shook his head. "No." The room became quiet. Bruce looked at the young wrestlers. "A loss only becomes a loss when you refuse to learn from it." Nobody spoke. Bruce continued. "A mistake can become a teacher." He looked toward the stranger. "Pride can become a prison." Then he looked at the sumo champion. "And strength can become dangerous when you don't know how to control it." The champion slowly nodded. He understood. He had spent years trying to become stronger. But nobody had ever taught him how to become calmer. Nobody had taught him how to listen. Nobody had taught him that sometimes the strongest movement was the smallest one. Several days passed. The story spread through the martial arts community. People talked about the enormous champion who had challenged Bruce Lee. Some said Bruce had defeated him. Others claimed Bruce had used secret techniques. Some exaggerated the story. Some invented details. But the people who had actually been there knew the truth. Bruce hadn't won by overpowering the champion. He had won by understanding him. And the champion's behavior began to change. During training, he stopped rushing. He listened. He watched. He breathed. When younger wrestlers made mistakes, he no longer shouted at them. Instead, he asked, "What did you feel? Where was your balance? What happened before you lost control?" The younger athletes were surprised. Their champion was becoming a teacher, and Bruce watched from a distance. He never asked for credit. He never told anyone that he had changed the man's philosophy. One evening, the sumo champion found Bruce outside the training hall. The sun was disappearing behind the buildings. The streets were turning gold. The champion stopped beside him. "Bruce!" Bruce turned. The champion held out something. It was a small wooden plaque. Bruce looked at it. "What is this?" "A gift." Bruce smiled. "You don't have to give me anything." "I know." The champion placed it in Bruce's hands. On it were several words. "Strength without control is only noise." Bruce read the sentence, then looked at the champion. "You wrote this?" The champion nodded. "I wanted to remember what I learned." Bruce handed it back. "You don't need this anymore." The champion looked confused. "Why?" Bruce pointed toward his chest. "Because now it's here." The champion smiled. His eyes became wet. He lowered his head, then bowed deeply. Bruce returned the bow. No audience, no cameras, no trophy, no applause. Just two men standing beneath the evening sky. One had entered the story believing that size was strength. The other had entered it believing that understanding mattered more. And somewhere between them, both had learned something. Years later, the champion would still remember that first moment. The moment he had pointed at Bruce Lee and asked him to prove himself. At the time, he thought he was challenging a small martial artist. He didn't realize he was challenging an entirely different way of thinking. He had expected Bruce to fight his body. Instead, Bruce challenged his mind. He had expected Bruce to answer arrogance with arrogance. Instead, Bruce answered it with patience. He had expected humiliation. Instead, he received respect. And that was the lesson he carried for the rest of his life. Because there will always be someone bigger, someone stronger, someone faster, someone louder, someone who enters the room convinced they cannot be defeated. But strength isn't measured by how much space you occupy. It isn't measured by the number of people who fear you. And it certainly isn't measured by how hard you can hit. True strength begins when you can control yourself. When you can remain calm while everyone else is losing control. When you can walk away from an argument without feeling that you lost. When you can admit that you don't know something. When you can learn from the person you once underestimated. And perhaps most importantly, when you can help your opponent stand after you've defeated him. That was the moment the sumo champion finally understood Bruce Lee. Not as a judge, not as a celebrity, not as a smaller man standing in front of a giant, but as a man who had mastered something far more difficult than physical strength. He had mastered himself. The arena had once been filled with thousands of people. Cameras had flashed. Crowds had shouted. A champion had raised a trophy. And a challenge had been issued. But when the noise disappeared, only one lesson remained. The sumo champion had entered that arena believing he needed to prove that he was stronger than Bruce Lee. He left understanding something completely different. He didn't need to be stronger than Bruce. He needed to become stronger than the version of himself who needed to prove it. And Bruce Lee, he simply walked away. No celebration, no victory speech, no claim of superiority. Just the same calm expression he had carried when the entire story began. Because for Bruce, the greatest victory wasn't making another man fall. It was helping him understand why he had fallen. And perhaps that's why the champion never forgot that encounter. Because he had walked toward Bruce, believing he was about to teach a lesson. Instead, he became the student. And that day, inside a crowded Japanese arena, a giant discovered something that no trophy could ever teach him. The most powerful person in the room isn't always the one who can overpower everyone else. Sometimes it's the person who doesn't need to.